So, you go to therapy to work on your anxiety, but you walk out convinced everyone else is the real problem. Or a friend starts therapy to figure out her relationship patterns, and 6 months later, she's labeled half her family toxic and cut them off. On the surface, this feels like progress. It feels empowering. But what if it's not? What if, instead of healing, you're just learning to speak a more sophisticated language of narcissism? What if the very process designed to help you is secretly reinforcing the exact patterns you need to break? Now, this isn't a blanket critique of all therapy. Far from it. It's a warning. It's a look into the shadow side of certain popular postmodern therapeutic trends. From my perspective as a Jungian therapist, I want to explore how the cultural demand for constant validation can inadvertently create a sanctuary from accountability, making us worse, not better. We live in an era where therapy has been destigmatized, and that's a profoundly good thing. But in the rush to popularize mental health care, some core principles have been flattened and repackaged for mass consumption. A big trend in therapy today, and it's a well-intentioned one, is to put you, the client, in the driver's seat. Influenced by social constructionism, these approaches often suggest that your personal reality is the primary reality, and the therapist's main job is to validate your narrative. The goal is to help you reauthor your life story into one that feels more empowering. If you see yourself as a victim, the work becomes building a new story of survival. It sounds right. It feels right. But here's the danger. What if the story you're telling yourself is fundamentally flawed? What if your narrative, while emotionally true for you, is factually distorted to protect a fragile ego? When a therapeutic process is only about validating your subjective truth, it can easily become a collusive exercise. The therapy room, meant for a confrontation with the unconscious, becomes a high-priced echo chamber, a sanctuary where you never have to face the most difficult truth of all. The problem might not be everyone else. The problem might be you. To understand why this is so risky, we need to look at the psyche, not as a single-story house, but from a perspective of depth. As a Jungian therapist, my tradition is rooted in the work of Carl Jung. He saw the psyche as a towering ancient castle with dungeons, hidden passages, and vast unexplored wings. It has layers. The conscious ego we show the world, and beneath it, the massive personal and collective unconscious. This unconscious isn't just a dusty basement of forgotten memories. It's an active, dynamic force, home to what Jung called the shadow. The shadow is everything we've repressed and denied about ourselves. Our greed, our envy, our rage, our vulnerabilities. It's all the parts we'd rather pretend don't exist. The goal of depth psychology isn't just to write a new story. It's a vertical process of integration. It is the slow, often difficult work of turning inward to confront the shadow and integrate its energy. Jung called this journey individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. And here's the critical point. This journey is impossible without encountering limits, frustration, and authority. It requires a therapist who can do more than just validate. The modern therapeutic focus on validation is, at its heart, a reaction against an older, more paternalistic style of medicine. And of course, validation is essential to build safety and rapport. But when it becomes the be-all and end-all of therapy, it can backfire spectacularly. For someone with narcissistic defenses, constant, uncritical validation is like pouring gasoline on a fire. At its core, pathological narcissism isn't about an excess of self-love. It's often rooted in a profound and painful deficit of stable self-worth. The grandiose shell is there to protect a deeply fragile interior, This person needs external validation just to feel real. A therapeutic model that only offers praise and agreement colludes with this defense. It fails to provide the optimal frustration necessary for growth. Think of a good parent. A good parent doesn't just praise a child. They also set limits. They say no. They allow the child to experience frustration because surviving it builds internal psychic structure. When a therapist only validates, they become an endlessly permissive parent, reinforcing the belief that the client's feelings are the ultimate reality and that any challenge is an attack. While many modern approaches like CBT, narrative therapy, and IFS absolutely provide this challenge, a purely validation-focused model risks perpetuating the very patterns that keep a person stuck. The second danger is that some therapy trends inadvertently provide narcissism with a powerful and socially acceptable vocabulary. The language of the therapy room has flooded the mainstream, and terms like gaslighting, boundaries, narcissist, and toxic are now used as conversational weapons. "You're gaslighting me" becomes a way to shut down any disagreement. "I'm setting a boundary" becomes a righteous-sounding excuse for cutting off anyone who offers uncomfortable feedback. "My boss is a narcissist" is a lot easier to say than "I struggle with authority and have a hard time with criticism." This allows people to create a narrative where they are perpetually the victim and anyone who challenges them is an abuser. It prevents real self-reflection because it's always easier to slap a label on someone else than to look at the one that might fit you. The final piece of the puzzle is the role of the therapist as an authority figure. Some modern approaches are explicitly non-hierarchical, casting the therapist as a collaborator, not an expert. But in-depth psychology, the authority of the therapist isn't about power. It's about providing a container. The therapy room is a temenos, a sacred space, and the analyst's job is to hold that space firm so the client has something solid to push against. A person with narcissistic defenses will inevitably test this frame. They might devalue the therapist or idealize them. They might try to manipulate session times or fees. This isn't malicious. It's an unconscious, desperate attempt to see if the container will hold. They're testing whether the therapist, like everyone else, will either collapse or retaliate. A therapist who is afraid of their own authority, who sees themselves only as a collaborative peer, will fail this test. By trying to be nice, they fail to be kind. They abdicate the symbolic role of the one who can withstand the patient's projections without breaking. This collusion is a profound betrayal of the therapeutic task. It leaves the client adrift in a world without walls, confirming their grandiose belief that they are the exception to every rule and reinforcing their inner terror that there is nothing solid enough to hold them. The consequences of this kind of feel-good, collusive therapy aren't just a lack of progress. It can make things actively worse. Individuals become more entrenched in their defenses, and their capacity for genuine self-reflection withers. Relationships fracture because the person has been armed with a language of blame and an unshakable conviction of their own righteousness. They become relationally fragile, unable to handle conflict, disagreement, or the normal disappointments of life. They end up in a world that feels increasingly hostile, populated by toxic people and narcissists, never realizing that the common denominator in all their failed relationships is them. Their life becomes a lonely, empty echo chamber. So what's the alternative? The answer isn't to abandon therapy, but to seek out a therapy that is brave enough to be challenging. True, transformative healing isn't found in the endlessly reassuring light of validation, but in the willingness to go down into the darkness of the shadow. Real therapy should feel difficult at times. It should involve a therapist who does more than just nod and affirm. A real therapist listens deeply, not just to your story, but to the story beneath the story. They listen for contradictions and defenses. They aren't afraid to interpret, to challenge, and to wonder aloud if your perception is the whole picture. This kind of therapy builds internal structure. It helps you develop the capacity to self-soothe, tolerate ambiguity, and take responsibility for your life. It doesn't just offer you a new, more empowering narrative. It helps you build the internal strength to face reality without needing a script to protect you. The goal isn't to feel good during therapy. The goal is to become a more whole and resilient person outside of therapy. If this conversation resonates with you and you're interested in a psychology that embraces depth, complexity, and the difficult but necessary work of self-confrontation, subscribe to this channel, check out my Substack, and join my school community or contact me to book a session. We go beyond the surface-level answers to explore the real challenges of the human psyche. In our culture of quick fixes and constant comfort, it's tempting to believe that therapy should always feel good. But growth isn't always a pleasant process. True psychological healing doesn't come from a therapist who simply confirms your worldview. It comes from one who is strong enough to hold up a mirror and help you look at your own reflection, warts and all. Authentic therapy doesn't just teach you a new language to describe your wounds. It gives you the strength to actually heal them. And that process requires heat, pressure, and courage. It's not about feeling validated. It's about becoming whole. I'm Dr. Bren. Thank you for watching.